Here we go. It's live. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the 1455 author series. If this is your first time joining us for an event, welcome. If you're already part of our community, thank you and welcome back. I'm Sean Murphy. I'm the executive director of 1455. If this is your first time, what is 1455? We are a nonprofit arts organization, and our mission is both simple and transparent. We provide as much free programming year-round as we can, all around showcasing storytelling. So we focus a lot, understandably, on writers, but we also take every opportunity to celebrate poets, music, dance, everything and anything that is conveying narrative. So that's what we do here. One of my favorite features is our monthly author series. Tonight, we are joined by Jennifer Lang. I'm very excited to talk to her about her memoir in miniatures, Places We Left Behind. Before we jump in, I do want to note, as always, we are partnering with DC's historic Potter's House, which is not only a bookstore in the Adams Morgan neighborhood, it's a community space for conversation, culture. It's been around for decades. We do live events there, but we proudly partner with them. And I encourage you to buy your copies of this memoir from them, support independent booksellers, and make a difference. And check out the Potter's House. Their mission is amazing, and I encourage you to support them. So let's get it on. I was saying before we came on live, Jennifer and I booked this, and we'll get into why this and how this happens, but we booked this event quite a while ago. So I always look forward to our events, but I've really been looking forward to this. I got her memoir early enough that I read it, and then I got to reread it. So I'm really ready with a ton of questions. Let me introduce Jennifer. I will read her brief bio, and you'll see what we're dealing with here. Very impressive. Born in the San Francisco Bay Area, where she's talking to us this evening, Jennifer lives in Tel Aviv, where she runs the Israel Writers Studio. Her prize-winning essays have appeared in, among other, Baltimore Review, Under the Sun, Midway Journal, and elsewhere. She holds an MFA from the Vermont College of Fine Arts and is an assistant editor at the awesome Brevity Journal. She's a longtime yoga practitioner and instructor, and her memoir in miniature, which we're discussing tonight, Places We Left Behind, published this month, yay, and landed a yogi's memoir in Pieces and Poses. What a great title. Will come out in October of 24. So this is the year of Jennifer. Jennifer, welcome, and congrats on the publication. This is still hot off the presses. So first and foremost, thank you for being here, and congrats. How does it feel to have this memoir in the world?
It's so new. So many people had received their copies in America, let's say, before I even landed. So I arrived in San Francisco 2 days ago, and I held my book for the first time. So it was a really weird anticlimactic situation for me, because I'm in Israel and we couldn't do the pre-orders to Israel. And so, yeah, it's, Amazon US, UK, Canada, but, kind of Europe and Israel and other places, not so easy to do this stuff.
Well, and how appropriate for this memoir that really talks and discusses and explores places you go, places you leave, all the different feels that are involved with not having roots down that one can, stay with for an extended period of time. So yeah, you're rolling with the punches, but yeah, you're back to where you began, literally and figuratively, to discuss this tonight. So I think that's pretty special. And I want to set the tone. You have a beautiful blurb from Rachel Barenbaum. She aptly blurbs this memoir as being, quote, for anyone who has ever loved deeply and been willing to take risks for the sake of love. With that teeing us up, talk a little bit, set the tone for us, the origins of this memoir. I mean, anyone that reads it will figure out what it's about, what you're after, but tell us about when you decided, I'm going to write a memoir, and this is how I'm going to write it.
Sean, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is fabulous.
Our pleasure.
But what I really want to say is, you've got to be kidding me. I had no idea that this is what I was writing about. It was not so clear. I'm not sure if it is that clear for a lot of writers. And honestly, this kind of just, in a way, this book just happened, and not linearly, not clearly or cleanly. So back during my MFA, 2015, my mentor that I was working with, Pat Madden, was in the margins of my essay about writing about being in the sealed room in 1991 during the first Gulf War with my new husband of 4.5 months, and then running for shelter with my teenage daughters and my husband in our bomb shelter in our house in Renana, Israel, after moving back to Israel in 2014.
Yeah.
And this mentor wrote in the margins, I think that these are separate topics, and I think that you might want to think about writing about your marriage. Your marriage is interesting. And that was really where it launched from. So it wasn't me, it was him.
Yep.
It took me a really long time and a lot of, thinking, what about my marriage? What was so interesting? Because it was my marriage. So like,
Right.
why is that interesting? Yeah. And having someone who I didn't know well point out to me the things that made that compelling.
Yep.
So
It is also an entryway, right? We all need, when we're writing about any topic, we need something, well, not always, but we need something relatable as a point of departure that we either return to or is like the thematic through line. And certainly your marriage then takes us to the travel, to the memories, to raising children, and et cetera. So yeah, I mean, you did get good advice, but it sounds like you already had a lot of this material. You just, when it clicked and you figured out, this is how I can do it. I think that's good for a lot of writers to hear, because very seldom do we start a project with a clear idea of where we're going. I think we always need to be open to being surprised and delighted by our own like epiphanies when we're in the creative mode.
I just came across some old notes from probably one of the first writing conferences I attended down near you, Goucher College, right?
Yep.
Baltimore. It was run by Creative Nonfiction, the organization,
Yep.
and it was like in 2006 maybe. And I was driving back to White Plains, New York, where we were living at the time, and I had this crazy epiphany, and I had the title, which was "Mom on the Move: Which Way is Home?"
Yeah.
So yes, it's been percolating for a very long time, but the entree in is what's so difficult, right? Where do you start?
Right. Well, and you made a very deliberate decision to, and I personally think memoirs that are both willing and able to do this make things much more effective by not having an A, B, C to Z. I think good memoirs in yours exemplifies memoirs can operate kind of the way our minds operate. You can be in 2023 and something will smell or something will make you be a child again, and something will bring you back to a pivotal moment. This memoir in miniatures I don't want to say bouncing all over the place, because that implies disorganization, but it's bouncing all around the writer's mind. And so we really get inside how memory works, how, we continue to reconcile with the decisions we made decades ago that of course reverberate later on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I think one of the questions that anyone would want me to ask you, and we don't have to go deep on this, but I think it's always an interesting question when memoir is discussed, which is when one makes the decision to write about real people. That is a decision that has to be navigated creatively and otherwise. But then writing about one's family, I think best case scenario, that's always a very delicate process. I'm curious, I would imagine you knew at a certain point, this is what the topic is, but how did you find navigating that? And not just for this work, but in general, as you've, worked your way, the kind of writing you do, has there been difficulty or has it been easy, both?
No, we'll go back to the word difficulty. During my MFA, when it became apparent that I should start doing this or wanted to start doing this, I asked my husband permission to write the story of our marriage. So that was kind of the easy part. And I think when he said yes, he probably thought, where's this going to go? Like nothing's going to come of this. So,
Right.
I don't think I saw the end either. Right. So in a way, it was easy to just say, sure, because
Yep.
who would have thought? That said, I have one sibling who stopped talking to me about 7 years ago because of something that I wrote.
Oh, wow.
That it really wasn't about him. Sorry. It was about my loss of home base, which is a topic that I, harp on. And a mention of something about my parents and their marriage, and my sibling just went crazy on me and cut off all ties.
Wow. Wow.
So, you can get into a lot. We didn't have a great relationship, right? We had already had a lot of conflict. So this just kind of made it easy, actually. But he also, at the same time, took the opportunity to tell me that he would sue me if I ever wrote about him. So that hangs over me. Then to add to that, when I had a finished manuscript that's really does not resemble what this book is about, that you see, that you've read, but back in 2016, when I had 65 something thousand words, my oldest came to me and said, because I'd been writing about my children, my younger two, since before they were born, and my oldest one, he was probably around 2 when I started. And he came to me to say, can you stop using my name, please? I would like you to stop using my name. He was entering the young adult world with his own identity.
Yep.
Right. And so all of this happened at the same time. And so, it's incumbent upon the writer to figure out like how to honor different people's, desire for privacy or never to be mentioned or whatever. So, yeah.
Well, you probably won't be surprised to hear that, in the authors that I've spoken to over the years, memoirs in particular, I don't think I can name a single example, and this should surprise no one, that the person said, it was pretty painless. I was surprised how easy it was to write the material, to, re-experience it, to try to get it accurate, and to try to honor the wishes. And I love that you use that word, because I think that that's a critical component of this, honoring the material, being true to your vision, being true to what you're attempting to share with unknown people, while having the respect and space that's required to navigate that. I think a lot of people might not realize exactly how laden that process is with anxiety. And I also would imagine, I've experienced this. One of the funny things is, as someone that's written fiction and memoir, the irony, of course, is that I've written a novel where people assume that that was me. And it's like, no, that didn't happen to me. And I've written a memoir where people have understandably said, that's not how that happened. So in a sense, you're always going to disappoint somebody. That shouldn't inoculate one from trying to honor doing the right thing, which again is wearing a lot of hats ethically, but understanding that you're never going to have a situation where you, the readers, and the family are happy. You proceed as well as you can.
Yeah. Proceed with caution as well as you can. Exactly.
Proceed with caution. Yeah. Yeah. And I would imagine with you, the calculus at some point became, I've got a story where I, of course, am writing about me and my family, but I'm writing about things that are pretty resonant with just about any adult who has either traveled, had a family, had issues with putting roots down or uprooting, et cetera, et cetera. So it's such a unique story. And I want to, of course, dive a little deeper into your story, but, it also, everything you're talking about are pretty universal themes that I think just about anyone can learn from or relate to.
Well, that's definitely the hope.
Right. Right. So before we came on, we still hadn't established, but I want to make sure our audience has an opportunity to see and hear some of the words. I would encourage you to read anything you'd like. And again, as we converse, at any time you want to hold up your hand and go, let me read a piece. Because as the readers, as our audience will see, these are memoir in miniature. And so it really lends itself. We can jump in and out, or you can give us a sample now, but I'd certainly love to hear a little bit of this.
Sure, with pleasure. So this is, I'm not quite sure, they're not numbered, maybe the 6th little chapter. I think the thing I need to say, though, is it's written very unconventionally. And so in a reading, I'm reading a piece that's more conventional prose. because I can't convey. There's a very strong visual element to the book, and I'm not reading from anything that requires seeing it.
Gotcha. And I'll just add to that. So folks, you're of course going to buy this book, but one of the joys is the unconventional and very effective use of, shall we say, non-text, and we'll leave it at that. But it is a strategy that really pays off.
And I must say, the paperback is much better than the Kindle, than the e-reader. It just didn't, they weren't able to do everything that I intended in the electronic version. So never, ever. When I awaken to an empty bed, I follow my nose. Odors of breakfast drift down the hall toward the galley kitchen. As batter hits butter, hissing sounds sing. Joyeux anniversaire, he says. In a fitted t-shirt and floral boxers, Philippe flips crepes single-handedly, a sight I've never seen before. No man has ever made me crepe. No Frenchman has ever made me crepe. No any nationality man has ever made me crepe. Summer heat and sexual desire swarm my every cell. He tells me to sit, serves me impeccably round, thin, buttery crepe. I watch his string bean long legs cavort in the confined space, hearing my brain croon words like stay, forever, keep him, while striving to ignore the others about distance, religion, and political climate. It's not a perfect fit, and I'm old enough to know better. So this takes place in Haifa, Israel in 1989, a few months after we met.
Yep. So I'm going to need more of that, but let's also briefly, because it's not the focus of the book, shouldn't be the focus of our conversation, but I just want to compliment you. In addition to navigating, discussing, exploring family issues, we'll say, you deal gracefully and generously with let's just say religion with a lowercase r. That is a recurring leitmotif, different faiths, different ways of accessing and using faith. Talk as much as you care to about that, but I just want to say, having read the book twice, you handle what could be either a very thorny issue or just something that everyone's got an opinion about. So I just want to salute you for handling that in a way that a lot of writers just frankly are not capable of handling with grace and generosity.
Yeah. So the main thing I need to say is we're not of different faiths. We're both Jewish, but in Judaism, you have different denominations. So I grew up Reform, very assimilated American Jew in Northern California, one of very few Jews in the city where I grew up. But I also grew up with a very strong sense of Zionism supporting Israel, which was not a common combination, especially in the 1970s. He grew up Jewish with no label. There are no labels, really. It's not like America in Europe. It's just traditional. It's just Jewish. And putting a label on it and putting his Judaism in a box, the way that I tried to from the moment I met him, drives him crazy. He's just Jewish. So Philippe grew up he grew up in a kosher home where meat and dairy, plates and cutlery and pots and pans are separated. He grew up changing plates for the 1 week holiday of Passover, Pesach. He grew up in a synagogue where men and women sit separately. He grew up where his father taught him how to put on the little boxes to wrap, it's called tefillin, every morning and pray, starting from his bar mitzvah. I mean, all of that was like crazy religious to me.
Right.
And I was not graceful in dealing with it in the moment while we were living. Nothing about what I did in my reaction was graceful. So thank you so much for using that word in the writing. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I mean, that's, again, what we're getting, the layers of complexity of, any young couple. There's the physical, a spiritual attraction that maybe has to be the impetus to get through the early patches and then the later patches. But, it's a recurring theme, but you are, you're discovering deeper layers, both within your marriage and within yourself. And again, I think without needing to even say religion, it's a beautiful way of reminding us that, especially in 2023, differences can be bridged, meaningful dialogue, honest, open conversations usually yield compromise, if not even better results than that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I have a couple of lines that I wrote down when I was reading. I think one line that will resonate with anyone who reads this book is when you observe, quote, "I married this place as much as I married this person." Talk a little bit about that experience, because I think someone that, say, moved from California to Oregon, yeah, there's elements, but you were really bridging some deep geographic, cultural divides, and that was not a small deal.
Yeah. So what I had in my favor was I'd spent more time in Israel than Philippe ever had. By the time we met, he had immigrated there, and I was just there as a tourist for a few months with no intention of staying. My sibling had immigrated there, and was becoming more and more observant, ultra Orthodox. And I just didn't want anything to do with it. I was on my way back to graduate school in America. I had a very firm, clear path ahead of me. So the fact that I, 5 weeks after getting there, arriving in 1989, met this man and fell in love and decided to stay, not so easy. I was wrestling from the very beginning. The main thing that helped me understand that I had my own desires to be there apart from this relationship was my mom, my aunt, and some of my closest camp and childhood friends sent me back letters I'd written them in the 80s. Wow. So in the writing of this book, I re-met my younger self in the letters that I was writing in 89 and 90, especially, and my own enchantment with Israel as a young, very idealist woman, wondering if maybe I should stay. And I'd forgotten that, really forgotten that. So that really came to the fore in the research part of this,
Jennifer, I'd love to hear a little more about what else you discovered or surprised you in terms of, I just, that's a rabbit hole. That's such a wonderful rabbit hole of, I think, especially for writers, because we live in that world, rediscovering who you are and how at times we get a deeper or different view of what we may have remembered. And when faced with evidence like a letter, I find that absolutely fascinating.
I think for me, it was more than that. It was like I'd spent decades pointing a finger at my spouse saying, I stayed because of him. I'm back because of him. I moved here again because of him. But I wasn't owning my part. I had also kind of maybe thought, okay, I could do this too. Could I do this too?
Right.
And so that's what it showed me. It reminded me of a whole, I blocked it out. In creating my new narrative of I did this for this person, I blocked out what, this truth. And that was extraordinary to find that.
Right. And you had the courage, both as a human being, but as a creative, to really think about the implications of that. Mm-hmm. And I think that the depth that brings to the narrative, pays off in spades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So did that answer your question?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, we could go even deeper, but I think another thing that struck me is, we don't have in this narrative two places. You're putting down semi-roots. I think it speaks to your adaptability and what I perceive as a very optimistic, positive, making the most of where you are. And I was really taken by, the very understandable impulse of I need some stability, but you recognize, but there's opportunity and there's stability in the opportunity. It is kind of an onion that is peeling through your journey of these different places. And, what's best for the kids, what's best for me, what's best for my spouse. Again, I think I can't imagine anyone reading this narrative that's not going to, that some of that isn't going to resonate from their own personal experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. After growing up, in the same place for 18 years, I kind of look back and I just think, how did I go from that to that? It doesn't really make sense. But I think I need to say, like, we grew up very American on the one hand. I mean, I went to summer camp, which is in California. It's like maybe 2.5 weeks long. That's the maximum you'd go for. And we took road trips. We grew up camping and, driving up to Oregon, to the Shakespeare Festival, driving to Montana, to Idaho. We took a ferry to Vancouver. Like, I remember all this stuff, or I know parts of it. But I also went to Israel in 1971 at age 5 for my first time to meet my great uncle and my great aunt. My grandmother's siblings from Romania all came to San Francisco in the early 30s, impoverished, illiterate, uneducated, because they had distant family that told them to come, help them come. Yeah. And in 1947, 48, 2 of them moved to Palestine. And so I grew up with this family in this country far away. My mom, her first trip to Israel was, I think that was her second time. She did not grow up with Israel. The first time she ever heard about Israel was in college during the Suez Canal crisis.
Wow.
She grew up with very assimilated American Jewish-born parents in Los Angeles. They were immigrants from different parts of America. They were transported from different, what do we call that? They're born in America, but one came from Chicago, one came from New Jersey. Okay. And they were, trying to make it in Hollywood. And they grew up super assimilated to the point where my mom grew up with a Christmas tree.
Right.
And then she moved up north to Berkeley, to UC Berkeley, and met my dad, who grew up with Eastern European parents and a lot more tradition, not religion, tradition, not the same.
Yep.
And Israel. So Israel was a part of my dad's upbringing. And so the world was brought to me already when I was very, very young. And then we also had foreign students live with us a little bit. We did some French students when I was in middle school. And then we had a South African girl live with us when I was in high school after my sibling left for college. So my parents just, were very, very American, don't speak another language, super, super Californian, but I guess they had their eye on the world in a way and exposed us, which is amazing.
For sure. And I think you were kind of born into at least the philosophy of travel not being exotic in a bad way. I mean, I think that just thinking about my own kind of childhood, that I think runs counter to a lot of the classic American experience of you're in America. So that alone, I think gave you from an earlier age a different, perspective, and for lack of a better cliche, kind of a more worldly appreciation of how things work, and how that impacts politically, in terms of people's faith, in terms of roots and stability. All those things are constantly being perceived, where I think for the average American that certainly hasn't traveled overseas, there's really no frame of reference. So now that I think about it, I believe that this memoir could also be a very good guidebook of sorts for anyone that just doesn't even really understand the appeal or how that can shape a life, by being willing to travel and experience different things. Yeah. So another quote that I wrote down, it's a wonderful and complicated meditation, speaking of Israel in particular. At one point you are thinking, and I quote, "I've settled in this sliver of land where the personal and the political are tangled, inseparable, insufferable." So A, I love that line. And B, I'd love you to talk a little bit about how that sort of epitomizes one of the early struggles that you really had to work through. It wasn't something you wish away, or you had to deal with it.
Yeah. So I live in a really complicated place and controversial place, and I recognize that. And I don't take a personal political stance in my writing, but I can't write and avoid or deny that context in which I'm living, in which I'm writing, it affects everything. So we got married in September of 1990, 5 weeks after, or 5 weeks before our wedding, 5 or 6, I can't remember, 5 weeks before our wedding, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and this crisis started. And it was the background of our wedding. My parents' best friends from California canceled at the last minute. They were scared.
Right.
And so then we got married, and we had a small for Israel standards, 100 people, ceremony in the hills of Jerusalem. And then we went abroad to celebrate with our families, so France and America. And upon returning in September, we were handed gas masks in boxes from the Israeli government. Handed. I mean, we had to pick them up. We couldn't, we signed for them. A feminine one, a masculine one. Our names were on it. Our identity numbers were on it.
Yep.
And we put them in a closet and listened to the news. And mid-January of 1991, 4.5 months into our, new life, we were awakened at 3 a.m. by an air raid siren. So I was 25 years old. Never heard that sound before. And, we knew it was coming, but it's also still very different than when it happens.
Right.
And I could probably say with tremendous certainty, we didn't have this word at the moment, but that only in my early 50s, upon returning to Israel and sadly hearing that siren again, I can say I had PTSD. That sound unglues me. That sound creates a visceral reaction in my body, uncontrollable.
Yep.
And I've calmed down a lot as I've grown up, but it undoes me. And it's just in the background. It's always in the background. It's impossible to separate the two things.
Yeah.
And I write for many reasons, but one of them is to show the world, and I don't mean Jewish necessarily, I really mean the greater world and very much the American population.
Yep.
What is this country about? What happens here? I'm trying to show, like, on the one hand, to normalize it, the normalcy of it, pay my bills, work, fill the fridge, make dinner, go out to the movies,
Yep.
go to the beach, take a bike ride. But on the other hand, there's this stuff that's pretty much constantly happening.
Right.
And it's hard sometimes to know, like, let's just keep to America. The way American media portrays Israel, it's hard.
Sure.
To be the American and to see it and to read it and to hear it and to just think, okay, well, that's not fair. So they're impossible to separate.
That's right. And I salute, I think it's critically important that books like this expose, I'll just say, the average American, and I'll just throw myself in that, the average reading American. It's just a good reminder and I really do think this is no political or religious sentiment. We are in many ways very sheltered in the West, or in America in particular. And some of these realities are things that people could never fathom. So among the many other things that your work does, it's just a very stark reminder that the world is very complicated, and at times very dangerous. And if that's true in America, of course, but I was struck. I'm not naive to these realities. I'd like to think I haven't been, but it's just a reminder of, I've never looked at a real gas mask, certainly never had one issued to me. So just a very jarring, and again, when I say necessary, I think it's good for Americans to understand and be reminded the world is not as simple as we like to think it is sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed.
So, I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't try to get you to just talk a little bit. It's not a trick question or intended to be a difficult question, but just talking about the title, Places We Left Behind, and also just ruminate, if you care to, on, how you define home. I'll cheat a little bit and say what I got from your book and was very helpful for me is the notion that a reminder that home is, of course, a place, and it can be places, but home is also figurative, and it is also involves memory and safety and stability. So if you want, I'd love you to riff on both the title and what that signifies to you, and what the notion of home is and how that has either changed or, shifted throughout your life.
So I think I'll start by reading, if that's okay.
It's more than okay. Perfect.
Okay. The chapter Places Left Behind.
Excellent.
This is about midway through the book.
Okay.
Let me just give a year on this. 2000, the end of 2000.
Okay.
One night we lie on the living room carpet, a habit we started after our first was born, and we removed our coffee table to cuddle and be closer to him on the floor. My boss called, Philippe says, reaching for my hand. We have to relocate, New York or Israel, or I'll lose my job. New York. Everyone's predicting the local.com bubble is going to bust, and I don't want to be unemployed. New York, I repeat. Okay, as long as we buy a house. The long, miserable, depressing year it took him to find his first job in high tech was enough for me. I need to nest where I can manage meal, pay bills, and navigate healthcare in my mother tongue, where I can avoid the topic of suicide bombs altogether. In 2000, New York is relatively safe compared to Israel. Raising kids is hard enough, I say. I'm overwhelmed when all three need me. I can't be a good parent unless I feel secure. I don't in Israel. Do you get it? He laces his fingers through mine. But I can't imagine leaving my parents again, I sob. I'm willing to move so you can keep your job, but I'm sick of feeling uprooted, never knowing how long we're staying. Our nonstop negotiations and mobile marriage continue. When Philippe had the jitters after our wedding a decade ago, he predicted our intractable conflict like a prophet. No matter where we reside, one of us will always rue the loss of the place we left behind.
Thank you for reading that and sharing that, and thank you for writing that. I can't say enough about what and maybe I need to put a finer point on my opinion that your decision to do a memoir in miniatures, again, if handled lightly or ineptly, would be, I don't know what it would be, but the power of these short, devastating, insightful passages really, I think, in a very strategic way, are more powerful than a longer meditation with more facts, more details, more feelings. I just can't imagine any mother hearing or reading that isn't moved to tears at the notion of, again, we're not talking about convenience and stability. We're talking about what's best for the children, what is best for the marriage. And then your book is constantly reminding us that, but bills have to be paid and careers have to be managed. Groceries have to be bought. All of that is just constantly in this blender that we call reality. But your meditations on this and having kind of navigated that, your family, the bravery and the willingness to talk through what is best is very inspiring.
Yeah, we were searching for home, so this kept coming up. I think of all the moves we did, this was the only one that was really for a job, meaning these other moves, we left Israel for Paris for Philippe to go to graduate school.
Yep.
We left Paris and went to California for me to be closer to my parents. Mm-hmm. But that move from West Coast to East was for his job at that point. And then everything else that followed was also like choice, making the job work with the choice. Home. Yeah, that's what you asked me about. What is home?
Yeah.
Complicated.
Yeah.
It's like my pet topic. And it's the 4-letter word that I think I've finally written it through to the end. This book starts in 1989. It ends in 2011 with our move back to Israel. Landed, the second book, A Yogi's Memoir in Pieces and Poses, starts upon landing in Israel in 2011. And it's my 7-year search on and off of a yoga mat to finally find home.
Yep.
And I think I'm not going to give away what happens. I really don't want to do that.
Right.
But I will say that what I have found rocked my world.
Wow.
Shocking.
Wow. Well,
For me, for me.
sure. I wish you could, well, I could hold up the paper, but my next question was another, I would be remiss if I didn't at least talk a little bit about yoga. I would love you to talk about how yoga is such a powerful force in your life, but more than that, I think it's a very universal theme for creatives to always be reminded. We always want to avoid cliches, but being physically well helps you be mentally well. Being mentally well helps you feel physically well. And we can't create even close to our peak potential if we're not finding some spiritual and physical balance. That's clearly very important to you.
Yeah, yeah. But it's not why I went to class. It's the first time when I was 30. It's not why I stayed in the class. Why I went was because a girlfriend that I'd met, an American that I met in Israel in '89, her boyfriend had gone to pull her from this yoga world that she was in New York and to bring her to Israel, which was their plan together. And so I thought it was a cultic thing when she first talked to me about it. She spent years, probably the better part of 5 years, talking to me about yoga and saying to me, if you ever get a chance, you should try a class. And I don't remember if in my 20s with her in Haifa, I went to a class, but if I did, it didn't move me.
Right.
But we got to California, and a half a mile away was this yoga studio. And it was my 30th birthday. And I took myself to a class for my first time. And this teacher, this amazing teacher, who it turns out was nationally famous, and I had no clue, Rodney Yee. One of the things he kept talking about was root your feet into the floor, root down into the earth, feel the ground underneath you. And every time he used any version of these words, these verbs, root, anchor, press, ground, I got teary because I felt like everything underneath me was spinning. I had been abroad for 7 years. I did not know where home was. I did not know, I knew that I felt good in the Bay Area, back in the Bay Area, but I knew that my French husband felt othered as soon as we landed. No one could remember his name correctly. They called him Felipe instead of Philippe. I mean, it's as simple as that, right?
Yeah.
And we were different. You know, no one could keep our story straight, where we met, where we were from, why, where we'd come from, how long we were staying. The questions were constant.
Right.
So the language of yoga every time just kept bringing me back to the ground underneath me. And it was powerful. The language was really powerful.
Thank you for sharing that. And I also want to salute you for you don't really sugarcoat. I think what people do get turned off when there's yoga enthusiasts is how it'll change your life. And there's it's maybe a little bit like writing, in that when we get enthused, we talk about the powerful possibilities and the freedom and the creativity. But you remind us it's also very hard, at least initially, right?
Mm-hmm.
You certainly you didn't just take to it. I don't know if anyone takes to it like the proverbial duck to water. I mean, it's getting limber, being able to do the poses, being able to be grounded in many senses of the word is a very challenging process.
Yeah. It wasn't the poses that kept bringing me back. I'd always been physical. I mean, I grew up in Northern California during the whole health food. My parents started exercising together in the early 80s. I definitely grew up with exercise. The fact that me from Oakland, California ended up as a yoga instructor, it's like that was a straight path for me. It was just, I had a lot of years away, right, between those things. But still, it wasn't the poses that I connected to. It wasn't the physicality. Mm-hmm. It was these words.
Wow.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how yoga has continued to be, and of course that's a teaser for the next book, I'm sure, but for especially for those watching and thinking about the kind of physical, spiritual, and creative triangle and how these interact, how has this positively impacted your writing?
Clarity. Just, you used the word already. I mean, but everyone who has some kind of a physical practice, let's use the word, swimming, running, whatever, everyone can, go out into the pool swim for 30 minutes, swim for an hour, and like thoughts, everything clears up, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same. It's the same for me. I have had moments where I've literally had full on paragraphs and epiphanies come to me during class. And to the point where once I ran out of class to the reception to ask for pen and paper to say like, oh my God, I have to write something down because I'm going to forget on the drive home.
Yeah.
If only we could record all of the clarity that we have during those moments.
Yeah. So
I would say the first thing is clarity. The second thing, you've used the word spiritual a few times. It was not a spiritual thing for me. It was, I wanted anything but to be spiritual because I'd had enough of religion in my home life. I did not connect to any chanting. I left before the final resting pose for years. I skipped out on the final resting pose. Mm-hmm. It took me 10 years to chant Om. 10 years. Wow. I would listen. Yeah. I mean, I've written about all this stuff, in other places. Yep. I had enough religion in my life, and Om sounded like Amen. And I just like, I didn't want more. So it wasn't a spiritual thing for me. But all to say in the book writing, in the laying it out on the page is the understanding that yes, this is my spiritual practice. This is my special place. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you for clarifying, and forgive me if I definitely unintentionally, if I implied spirituality, with a capital S. I guess I get very lofty when I just talk about creativity and the fact that most writers, it doesn't come easily. I half joke. One of the questions I'm asked, when I have an opportunity to talk to younger writers is, what's the hack? What have you learned? And, how do I access a higher level quicker? And of course there are strategies and there are ways you can read better and write and do exercises and listen to your mentors. But the reality is to do anything well requires practice, requires, for lack of a better, and we could use a million different words, but kind of a spiritual connection with creative energy and respecting it and understanding that it is difficult, but that difficulty can yield clarity. It can yield profoundly positive feelings about what we're doing here on Earth.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely.
So I would love to hear what you have to say. Speaking of capital and lowercase letters, but we talk at 1455, we talk about building community. And I appreciate how that always can sound like someone talking about yoga, and somebody immediately rolls their eyes, I think wrongly, right? But we talk about community and why that's important. I always love to disabuse people of the notion that when I say community, I don't mean touchy-feely writers supporting each other, although that stuff is incredibly important. But you mentioned earlier, you shouted out to your mentor, but when we talk about the literary community, the writers community, what does that mean to you, and how is that important?
It's really important, but what it means to me, the first thing I think of is I live in a non-English speaking country. And so it's really challenging. I'm an English language writer in a Hebrew speaking country. I started Israel Writer Studio to teach and to create community, for me, with a big C. I love different people coming to my table for different workshops and classes and letting them see that they're not alone. I mean, I love when my table's full. Full means 10 people plus me. Yeah. I love for them to see, I've had non-English speakers take my classes over the years. Mm-hmm. From Israeli to, I had a German woman once, I had a Russian woman recently. I'm fascinated by those people who are able to read and write in a not their native tongue. It's extraordinary to me. I, up until COVID, sadly stopped doing this, but I had started, I think 3 years before COVID, hosting literary events in my home where I would bring 3 writers with their new books, different genres, to read from their work. And I would invite my writing students, my writing community, people that I knew and didn't know, but that we would knew of each other, as a way to say, you don't always have to pay for a class to be part of a community. Because there aren't English language events in bookstores. where I live.
Right.
Right. You can go to readings, but they're going to be in Hebrew. Okay. So that's what I need to clarify. There are no English language writing centers.
Right.
So I did that up until COVID, and I never started it back up again. So for me, when I think of community, I think, okay, I have my community in Israel. It's small. We are small. It's all the genres together because we're just not enough of just nonfiction writers, for example. My classes are all open genre, all level open genre. But I feel like in a way, like my real community is in the States. It's the people that I went through my MFA program with at Vermont College of Fine Arts. Some of my mentors from there. I had 5 different residencies where I had to be physically present, and 4 different mentors. And I learned something different from each one of them. Extraordinary. And I think it's really important to credit people. This did not happen in a vacuum. This did not happen in a vacuum.
Right.
This is like one step after another step of learning something from someone, asking someone for advice, getting feedback, being introduced to someone, whatever it is. It's all part of community.
Right.
And it's really, really important to acknowledge that. And so.
Well, so what advice would you offer a younger or less experienced writer that's saying, I love everything I'm hearing. How do I start to do that? How do I join a community? How do I be part of a community?
So the first thing, you don't have to have an MFA. That's not that is not the ticket here.
Right.
You can absolutely be a reader as a starter. And I started like this way back, like at least 15 years ago, for a literary journal. So what's a literary journal? It's this whole world, literary journal, literary magazine. Google it, you will fall down a rabbit hole. Start to read different ones. Think, do you have a genre? Are you a fiction writer? Are you a short story writer? Are you a flash writer? Like, what do you gravitate towards? Mm-hmm. And I ironically gravitate towards, when I read, I love a good novel, but I'm a nonfiction writer. So, there's that as well.
Sure.
Start to read, start to get to know some of these. I don't think necessarily starting at the top is always the right way. I feel like there's a lot at the bottom of the food chain. There's a lot of lesser known journals that might be where you want to go. Yep. Start to read, start to fill out put your email in and start to get them sent to your inbox. And when you start to feel comfortable, look at the masthead, look who's there, who's involved. Something that I, as a 58-year-old woman, if I see the masthead is all, let's say, under 30, I'm not going to send my work there. It's not a good fit. I'm not who they're looking for.
That's right.
So start to see, where does your writing fit?
Yep.
Who do you connect to when you're reading? Look at the people who are in these magazines. And then the next step is, if you want to get involved, see if they're looking for a reader. Because all of these magazines, these journals, have a team, volunteer for the most part.
Yep.
Part of being a good literary citizen.
Here. Thank you. That's wonderful. And folks, those of you listening, please let me second. That is very, very good advice. And you might find that doing that is scratching a lot of potential itches. Getting involved in the community, paying back a little bit, you will learn a ton. You will make connections in a very authentic way. Jennifer, I mean, it's almost like, you just provided a service soundbite for any aspiring writer, and a reminder for experienced writers. Like, to be part of a community, you have to be part of a community. It's not transactional necessarily. It doesn't just come to you. So I thank you for that. We talked also a little bit before we came on air. And again, I think I would be remiss to at least not acknowledge, I don't know if it's the elephant in the room, but the reality that certainly in 2023 and for the last several years, a writer, it's now incumbent upon a writer. When I was in college, the formula was write really well and it'll work out. And the reality now is you write a book to the best of your ability, and all that involves, the revision and the craft, the practice, the focus. And it's like, okay, now what? Well, now you need to market it and promote it and, give yourself the best chance to connect with readers. Talk a little bit, if you care to, about your experience, because I know that I will just say, I think you are a great example of someone that takes every opportunity to figure out ways to connect with an audience.
Wow. Yeah, so I've had a lot of people comment on what's going on right now, which is I have just landed in the States for 5 weeks, 3 weeks where I'm from, where I'm born, where I was raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, and almost 2 weeks on the East Coast where we raised kids for 10 years. And I have created an extraordinary number of events that I started a year ago, but in earnest in January, sitting on my butt at my desk, on my chair, day after day, 5 solid days, sometimes, and part of Friday. Our work week in Israel is Sunday through Thursday. So I tried to be away from my desk for Friday and Saturday. I didn't always succeed on a Friday. Right. Following connections. I went to every one of my childhood friends, camp friends, anyone in the writing world, people not in the writing world, to say, hey, I've got this book coming out. This is what it's about. Can you connect me to? And then it was fill in the blank. Jewish Community Center, books, local bookstore, library, temple, yoga studio. I mean, all of that I was after all of that. Yep. And I went to Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois. I went to the alumni admissions, and there's a newsletter someone puts out from our dorm, and that person mentioned someone who I've never met, but we'd all lived in the same one dorm at some point. And this guy that he mentioned was very high, I don't know if that's the right word to say, very involved in the Reformed Jewish national organization. It caught my eye when I happened to be reading this newsletter more than 6 months ago. I reached out to the guy. Yep. I reached out. I introduced myself. He introduced me to a rabbi at the 92nd Street Y. It's the biggest JCC in America. It is very well known. It's open to everybody. And that slowly, like for months, since January, I was in conversation, being bounced from person to person, this, whatever. All to say, I have 2 events, one virtual. It's called Yoga Pros. So it's using your yoga practice to access story. And so I have a virtual event, and then I have a retreat in October at the 92nd Street Y in Manhattan. It's amazing. So that's an example, a really good example of like just what I created, what I did. I don't know how to put into words what I did, but I can say this. I leaned a lot on people. I asked favors. I had no choice. I don't live in America. I don't have the access to the organizations. I don't have the local library. So it was a lot of favor asking, which can be very uncomfortable.
Sure.
It's really uncomfortable. I came bearing kilos and kilos of gifts to everyone who is, granted me a favor.
Yeah.
Because I just feel indebted. Yeah. Really grateful. Really grateful.
Well, I think you've just given us a very powerful, real world example of how this all works. There's different paths, different people, you need to accommodate what works for you and your personality. But the reality, I think, and again, it's important especially for more aspiring writers to understand that the dynamic has changed, and it's increasingly on the author to create opportunities. But as you illustrate, it doesn't mean throwing things at a dartboard. The social media, the demons of our current existence can also be tools to connect, to take advantage of ways that technology can connect us to different times and places. Look at us talking right now in different time zones. So again, I thank you for giving us real examples of how one can not be overwhelmed by the process and really be more proactive and, heaven forbid, try to enjoy it. It's tough.
It worked for my personality. I'm really detail oriented and organized and not shy. So it works.
Well, Jennifer, I appreciate everything you've had to say tonight. I want to make sure, please remind us, and this will be we're going to post the video and I'll have links to your book, but how do people find you and how can they find out about your events and learn more about you?
First of all, thank you. This was great. Love this conversation. Thank you, Sean. So there's lots of places. So one is my own website, israelwritersstudio.com, WRITERSTUDIO, 1S. And everything is there. There's different pages and all the events are there. And my husband runs a company called Map Me, and he made me the coolest map for my events. super cool. So that's up there. I am on Facebook at Jen Lang Writes, Lang. I'm on Instagram at Jen Lang Writes, Lang. And I'm pretty friendly, so definitely approach.
Excellent. And folks, 1455litarts.org, go to our events page. There's information about our author there. And like I said, coming soon, we record these events, we share them. It'll be on our YouTube page, it'll be on our website, and I certainly will share it around social. So as always, we scratched the surface, but I like that because, hey, you've got to read the book to find out more. So our work here for now is done. But Jennifer, congratulations again, an extraordinary achievement. This is the beginning of your adventure. I look forward to being in touch and following your journey and being inspired by your words of wisdom. And let's make sure we're in touch, because there is another book coming out and I certainly am going to want to talk about it, but let us know how we can help. But for now, let's just be clear and succinct. Congratulations and thank you. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much. Have a great night.
All right. Be well, take care, and enjoy the ride.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right, folks, thanks for checking us out. It's always a pleasure. 1455litarts.org. Find out more, get involved, and listen to everything our author said, because she dropped a lot of wisdom tonight. Everyone be well. We'll talk to you soon.
Right.